Hello, we're going to make a video, and this video will discuss the setup of the special project server that has been set up for Professor Katari. I'll start the video at the point where I have connected to the special project computer using the X2Go client software uh, and the Mate desktop. There's another video that demonstrates connecting to the special project server using the X2Go client software, and you can review that if you need to catch up to get to where we are. First, uh, we're going to bring up the desktop, and then we're going to open a terminal window and get started here. So let me get that set up. And there's the Mate desktop. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to do a right click in the middle of the desktop to get the terminal window up. So you do the right click and you can come down and you can hit open terminal. So I'm going to make this text a little bit bigger, so I'm going to scrunch this screen down, and I'm going to hold down the control and the shift, and I'm going to hit the plus sign a couple of times. Okay, and move that around so it fits. Perfect. What we'll do now is we're going to take a look at some directories and discuss how things are set up. So we'll type change directories /opt/matlab, and then I'll type ls, and you can see two directories here. There's a directory 2021a-update 5. That directory contains the installation of the full version of Matlab with the license, all the toolboxes. That's the full-blown deal. Now, I'm going to actually go into this directory structure. Now, this directory path, opt Matlab Runtime 2021a update 5, version 9.10. This directory here holds an installation of the Matlab Runtime installation. Okay, and that'll come into play in a little bit. Now, next thing we're going to do is we're going to go and take a look at some a silly little bit of code I wrote to do some demonstrations here. So, so it'll be under the Matlab code and the source. And you might say, why do we want to compile Matlab code? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Some of them made a lot of sense not too long ago, when we did not have the kind of licensing that we have now on the campus. Because when you compile the Matlab code and then you run it in the Matlab runtime environment, you're not using a license from the license server. And so why that was of interest at one point in time was because the if you had a job that ran for sometimes months, sometimes the license server might go down because a new license had to go in or there was some kind of hiccup. If you were running in the Matlab runtime environment, your job wouldn't be affected. The only thing that would affect your job is the actual local environment, like the machine going down or something like that. So you weren't dependent on the license. Now, the other reason that folks might not want to use a license is you might have a machine that for one reason or another was doing academic software work, and you didn't have a license available to run on that machine. And so you could run the software on a machine that didn't need a license. So there were various reasons. Now, both of those reasons are kind of not so important now. Partly because we now have a Matlab site license and there's plenty of licenses to go around. Every once in a while you do have a situation where it is advantageous not to need a license. So that's, Matlab compiles still exist and are still useful. Okay. So let's go back to um, the code and getting things compiled. Okay, so I have some code. Let's just take a real quick look at the code. The code's really not that important. That's not what we're here for. It's a very simple little program with 2 for loops, and it just checks in here to see if they're both even, and if they're both even, it displays the values. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and run this just using the regular Matlab. And so I type Matlab, I redirect the code, the .m file, into the Matlab program. And here you can see the display screen pop up before it runs, and then it runs. Okay, now we're going to run that one more time. And what you can do is you can type no display. We're going to redirect the silly.m file in there. And this time no display screen will pop up. Well, actually it did pop up. Okay. Matlab. No display. No JVM. Silly.m. Okay. Yeah, it turned off no display, and I put in no JVM, which meant no Java virtual machine, and it didn't put up the display screen. Okay. So we see that the little silly.m file did work. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at compiling that silly.m file and running it in the MATLAB runtime environment. So the first thing you need to do, if it's your very first time coming in doing a MATLAB compile, you're going to need to run this command, mbuild -setup. And what mbuild will do is it will build a file that tells MATLAB what code, or not what code, what compiler code to use when it does the MATLAB compiles. So I'll just go ahead and hit this and we'll see what happens here. Okay, so this ran, and you can see that it says it's going to use GCC for my compiles. And that's the GNOME C compiler. Okay, now to compile the code, what we'll do is we'll type MCC for MATLAB Code Compiler, -M, that means make a standalone program, and then we'll type in V, and that'll allow us to see the compilation steps. V means verbose, and it'll show us what's happening as it's compiling it. There's another switch called -R, and this allows us to pass other options into the compile. For example, I could put that no display. I could put that no JVM that I ran previously. In this case, I'm just going to put single comp thread, and this just says don't do multiprocessing with it. Just use one core. Okay, and then I'll type in the code name, or the code file name, silly.m. That's the code. And I'll go ahead and I'll hit enter. And it'll take a second here. And it'll compile pretty quickly. Okay, so if I type ls to see what's in that directory, now we have a bunch more files. Before, the only file we had in here was silly.m. Now we have a file that will show us what files were excluded when the MATLAB code compiler was run. So we'll take a look at that. No files were excluded. It's a very small, simple .m file, so I would be surprised. So there will be a file most likely required when this runs, because it does have some functionality. So we'll count the required, and it, yep, looks like there's a little bit that's going to be required when it runs. It will look for that in the installation, the runtime installation. There's a file called silly. That file called silly is the executable, and not surprisingly, we'll take a look at it, which is a silly thing to do, but it's just a bunch of gobbledygook. And exclusion rule, there shouldn't be anything there on that. Oh, exclusion rule was a title, so that that was actually silly, not a file. Unresolved symbols. Okay, again, a very simple program. Everything worked out. The README file is interesting. If this is the first time you're doing a Matlab compile, it has a lot of useful information in it. Okay, so if you take a look at this file, it's definitely worth a look. And the run silly.sh, it's a script that was generated when we compiled the silly.m, and it is something that can actually be run, and it will set your program up and run your program for you. So we're going to actually go ahead and run that. Now you can either type sh run.silly, or since it's an executable, you can type /run-silly. The next thing that we have to do here is when we run this script, we have to put the location of the runtime installation. And if you remember, we did take a look at that at the beginning. It was under /app/MATLAB, MATLAB runtime environment, or MATLAB runtime 2021A update 5. And if you remember, there was another little directory called v910. Now, when we run this, it's going to run that executable silly using the MATLAB runtime environment, which is installed under that v910 directory. Okay, so it went and it went and ran. So that's all there is to compiling a simple piece of MATLAB code and running it in the MATLAB runtime environment. So I hope this was helpful, and thanks for listening.